Hi, Jim. The FMS, the Future Storage and Memory Conference, is coming up, and I'd like to talk to you about how you think it's changed over time, because you've been there for a number of years, like I have, and you've given a lot of keynotes. You're going to be talking at this one as well. So, how did it really start out, and how has it changed over time?
FMS did start out as just a flash memory summit back at a time when flash memory was just memory cards, USB flash drives, and NOR flash, which was what was used in cell phones, exclusively back at those days too. And it was a very expensive medium that has come down an awful lot in price over the 20 years of the show. But when SSDs really came in around 2004, 2005, then everybody started experimenting with how to use them in their systems. And flash-based systems, all flash arrays, started coming out. And the people who had those didn't have anywhere to really show them off. And so they started showing them off at FMS. That expanded it to where the other storage players wanted to be involved in the show. And meanwhile, people who made DRAM were also sometimes doing a little bit to highlight their DRAM products at the show.
Mhm.
So the show's management said, yeah, it is called the Flash Memory Summit, but we do, really do our best to incorporate talks from these people who are making other systems. And finally, they said, well, why not just, use the FMS name, but reconfigure it to being the future of memory and storage and open it up and say that it is the world's only real memory and storage show. And so that's what it's become. And it is very different because, now you've got people talking about things like HBM or like disks,
Mhm.
hard disks. And yeah, I don't think we've got any tape people there, but well, it's a pretty broad range of computing technologies.
Yeah, well, the other challenge is that, things have been changing over time. Right now, obviously, AI data centers are really big. And, I was just looking at one technology from Infineon, the MRDIMMs, which are,
Mr. Dim.
yeah, Mr. Dim. So tell us about how that's changing, that side of the storage market.
Well, MRDIMMs actually, what they're trying to do is just to get a little bit more bandwidth out of DIMMs. There are two things that DIMMs always need more of. One is capacity, and the other one's bandwidth.
Hmm.
And the way that they get more bandwidth is by dividing the capacity inside the DIMM into a couple of channels, so that you can do something that back when I was in college, the people called ping ponging, where you have the memory, and instead of having something that presented itself at its own latency rate, you'd have basically half the latency by having, one side come on and then the other side come on. And so, that's what the MRDIMM actually accomplishes. But there are other things too. SOCAMMs, I think, are a huge step forward because of the fact that they get rid of this connector that Wang Computer was using back in the 1980s for
Hmm.
memory inserts. And it's like this thing is like a great huge capacitor slowing down your data rate. So, SOCAMs are going to get rid of that. And people are trying out all these new technologies. Liquid cooling looks like it's going to become a mainstream thing. And
Hmm.
so we have companies who are showing liquid cooled SSDs, just all kinds of new technologies.
Well, the other thing that has changed is it used to be, you had a processor, you had some memory, usually just like one or two memory channels. Now there are a lot more, and we also have something called CXL out there. How does that play into the mix?
Well, CXL actually, it's a cool thing, and some people may have read Steve Liebsen's articles where he talked about the elephant that a bunch of blind men were trying to figure out what it was, and I put together a little chart for him. I said, "How does CXL fit in the normal memory hierarchy?" And ended up using an elephant to show where CXL would fit in. But it was a very negative kind of a view because at that time I was just looking at it, I was saying this is a really difficult fit into the memory hierarchy because CXL based DRAM, which is what it's mostly used for, is more expensive than standard DRAM, and it's slower because of the fact that you've got CXL interfaces attached both to the processor side and to the DRAM side. Although the processor side one is fast because it's inside the processor chip.
Hmm.
But now what is happening is that people need so much DRAM that you can't get it with DIMMs. If you add more channels to the processor for more DIMMs, that ends up burning up way too much power and consuming far too many pins. And CXL has a low pin count. It consumes a whole lot less power than a normal DDR bus. And so you've got people, at least in hyperscale data centers, really beefing up the memory in each server by
Hmm.
putting CXL on there. That's fueling great acceptance of CXL, and we'll probably see it expand into a lot of other places. It's not a technology I'm expecting to see used in PCs, at least not for a very long time, but
Right.
it's certainly something for big computers.
Yeah, well, with the data centers becoming extremely large, that's obviously a place where they're going. But
Yeah.
even on small servers, it's something that would potentially make sense depending upon what you're doing, especially if you're trying to do local AI and you want something that is going to be isolated from the internet.
Yeah, yeah, that's true. But also something that people have been doing a good job of is finding ways to put memory into AI systems that they wouldn't ordinarily be able to get. And one of the early champions of this was Phison. They've got a special SSD
Hmm.
that they have software configured so that that SSD can actually fool the GPU into thinking that it's got a larger HBM than it has. And that allows systems to use fewer GPUs. They have a speed consequence, but it's not an atrocious speed consequence. It's, more along the lines of, single digit numbers of slowdown. You've got Liquid. Yeah, they've been selling their CXL based memory systems as a way to reduce the number of servers that you need in these very large data set AI loads. And we're going to see more of that going forwards, where people find out that if they attach more memory to the system through CXL or through other means, that they're going to be able to reduce the other hardware that they have. And that's something very similar to what we saw with the advent of SSDs. It's something that Fusion IO, which later got
Hmm.
acquired by SanDisk, was they really made a name for themselves by doing this. That they'd go into a place, they'd say, use a Fusion IO SSD, and you don't need as many servers. And people would say, by golly, we don't. We go from 4 servers down to one. We're going to
Hmm.
see that happen again with it.
Now, one of the other things that often gets brought up at this particular conferences are the newer, not even newer, different memory technologies like MRAM, for example. Uh, how are those progressing these days? I know that TSMC is supporting some of these.
Yeah. Yeah, but also you've got companies like Everspin and Avalanche that are, dedicated to making discrete MRAM chips.
Hmm.
You've got other companies that are like Weebit at Nano is doing resistive RAM, although it's not something that's commercially available yet. They're making good headway. I think it's Mitsubishi who's got processors that use resistive RAM. ST Microelectronics has PCM, phase change memory microcontroller. And TI is making a microcontroller that's got ferroelectric memory in it. And that same ferroelectric memory is also being sold by RAM Exceed, which is a spinoff of Fujitsu in Japan, and Infineon, and they're all selling ferroelectric memory. So you've got all of these technologies available in a small way. Their biggest problem right now is that they are more expensive than the
Hmm.
mainstream technologies. And so because of that, they're only used in places that really, really need what they have to offer. In many cases, that's radiation tolerance up in outer space. If you've got
Hmm.
satellites flying up there above the atmosphere, our atmosphere actually protects us from a lot of radiation. And you send electronics up into space, suddenly you have to worry about what the radiation is going to do. It's going to flip bits in your
Hmm.
memories and that kind of stuff. And MRAM and ferroelectric RAM are both used in those applications for that.
Okay. Well, I'm looking forward to seeing you at FMS, and we'll chat a little bit more then. Thanks.
Should be a lot of fun, and we're actually one of the things that I get involved with is the Lifetime Achievement Award, And we've got somebody who I think is going to be a pretty exciting addition to the list of people that we've given the award to in the past. So I ask people to come and participate that with us in that. And yeah, I'm sure that we'll get a great audience applause for that person.
Excellent. Well, I'll see you there.